Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowry.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry. I'm an exercise physiology and sports nutrition professor of about 20 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
Hey, this is Phil Stevens. I run Strength Field. I'm a strength coach. Also a high school strength coach now, so that's kind of neat. But that's about it. Just lots of stuff going on. So,
nice. I'm Dr. Mike G. Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet Search and a bunch of other stuff. And I'm teaching at the Points Retreat in the Pequot Lakes, Minnesota this weekend. So I just hopped on here this morning to get this recorded.
Cool. All right, we have Chris Shugart with us. Chris, maybe just a sentence or two about yourself, not to throw you under the bus here early.
Oh, yeah, very early for me. I am Chris Shugart. I am a writer and editor, and I am the CCO of DNation.com.
Right on. All right, everyone. After the break, we're going to talk with Chris about some of the ways that fitness media gets put out there, right? Video and podcasting, maybe the explosion of it all, how to navigate the BS, all that kind of stuff, because Chris has long experience in that. We're going to start with just a little bit of news here.
Strength and muscle sport news.
Last week I mentioned a study that we are doing at my university, and that an almost identical study came out from Australia. And I just wanted to touch on this real quick. So a little bit of science news here, and of course anybody can chime in. This is International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, 2018. A daily cup of tea or coffee may keep you moving. The association between tea and coffee consumption and physical activity. It's Torquati, Torquati, and colleagues, University of Queensland School of Human Movement and Nutrition. So here we go. Physical activity, they say, is an important predictor of mortality in women. But fatigue remains a major barrier in this group. It's not well understood whether consumption of naturally caffeinated drinks is actually associated with physical activity. And we talked about this last week just a little bit, but the general idea is if you're more caffeinated, you're just going to move around some more. You know, you might take the stairs instead of the escalator or something like that. So they looked at 7,580 women. So we're not going to get in near that, but in our study. But participants reported average tea and coffee intake over the last 12 months, and then their usual physical activity. The ones who consumed 1 to 2 cups of coffee daily were 17% more likely to meet their metabolic equivalents, right? Their intensity times volume type of metabolic recommendation from the government. So 1 to 2 cups of coffee per day, 17% more likely than those who had less than 1 cup per day. As far as tea goes, let's see. More than 3 cups a day of tea, they were between 13 and 26% more likely to meet their physical activity recommendations. Now, to Mike, your point last week, you were saying, why did they do this? When you pull the full paper, and I'm not going to chew through the whole thing because we have Chris on here, but it says tiredness and energy. They had to mediate those things. So what they tried to do is use statistics to clarify how much overcoming fatigue was part of it, if that makes any sense. And they didn't have really strong conclusions on that. Just essentially that women who drink the 1 to 2 cups of coffee or 1 to 3 cups of tea a day were in fact more likely to meet their movement recommendations, as future research is warranted to investigate the causality and some of the lifestyle specifics. So it looks like it's probably going to do something. Our twist on this is just that we're going to look at this in university students. The first time we did, we tried to look at all of them, but that's not going to work, right? Because if you have someone wear a Fitbit or heart rate variability or all that kind of stuff, if a coach is driving them into the ground, that's going to affect this hugely, right? Because the caffeine isn't what's causing their movement patterns. The coach is making them do laps, if that makes any sense. So we're going to try to narrow this down to probably one specific sport, or maybe even just people who aren't on a sports team. But that's going to be weird for us because my school, we're like 70% jocks. Like literally almost 3 out of 4 of the kids are on a team. And that's not always true across universities. But so anyway, interesting stuff about stimulants getting you moving.
That is really interesting. You know, can I play devil's advocate to it?
Oh, sure.
Okay, I recently wrote a piece at tnation.com about income and your chosen style of exercise. And this was a big survey that some company did, I think, and they looked at how people train and how much money they make. Non-trainers, people who don't go to the gym at all, typically made less money than people who work out. And then they dug a little deeper and figured out that people who like really vigorous exercise, it sounded a lot like they were describing CrossFit or something, but any type of vigorous exercise made more money than people who go to the gym and walk on the treadmill and do a set of curls. And it was a company who did it. It wasn't like a fully fleshed out scientific study.
Okay.
The company said, see, this is why you need to be active. You'll make more money. And my response was, well, is this a chicken and the egg sort of thing?
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, people who push themselves to work out and care about that and have taken that next level, they're also the types who are going to like bust their ass at their job or be more dedicated or want to improve and climb the career ladder and stuff like that. So this kind of reminded me of that. I love caffeine. I'm always looking for positive caffeine studies to support what I want to do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But it did make me kind of wonder, do people who have that midday cup of coffee, are they already kind of the go-getters? The people who will move around more?
Yeah. No, it makes sense. In fact, Mike, you might have turned me onto this a year or more ago, that when under different types of stress, there may even be gender issues here. Like men will pursue more coffee when they're under stress, which seems counterproductive. Yeah. Maybe because they're getting aggressive in some way, I don't know. And then women. You know, not to say there aren't aggressive women. There certainly are. I know plenty. But you get the point. Is why are you turning to this? And Mike, this whole correlation thing is something that we obviously talk about often, right? That chicken or egg. Is it, in Chris, in your case, is it the higher income affecting, their choice of intensity, or is it sort of the opposite? They're intense people driving their income. And that's the problem with this Australian paper, of course. It's not a problem. Epidemiology is just like that. It's correlations. It's not causal. And I think that's last week, Mike, that's why you were saying, how much of this is overcoming fatigue versus maybe adding on top of your already high motivation, right? Something like that. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool because it's an idea of, hey, here's an association to look at. And then, like what Chris was saying, too, is, is it, next step would be to look, is it causal? What are other things, what are other variables we may want to look at as we kind of expand it out? But it's still a good first step to say, well, at least there's some association here that's probably worth doing some further investigation.
Right on, yeah. And with this, it says, with women, fatigue is a major barrier to physical activity. Now, again, population specific, right? This is Gen Pop, which makes me wonder, like, Phil, at Strength Guild, your people, are they using stimulant-type beverages? Are they doing that to overcome fatigue? Or are they doing it as part of a pre-workout to add on top of already high motivation?
Yeah, I'd say the higher motivation.
Yeah.
So they're just adding it anyways. Yeah, and we're all fatigued, I mean, we're working-class people in general. I don't have anybody that's like a professional athlete that's what they do. So,
right, yeah.
I have a lot of people that come in at 5 in the morning before they go to work, and a lot of people that come in at 5 afternoon after they work. So,
right.
We don't have the luxury. Few of us have the luxury of, it's our job to train.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, there's some energy too, but I mean, they'd be there anyways.
Right. Yeah.
So,
in fact, most of the stuff that I've done over the years, just presenting and publishing a little, is on that. Right. Is the pre-workout. As part of a pre-workout, that's how almost all of our studies begin, right? Because you're talking about people who they're not just trying to abolish fatigue. Good point. We're all fatigued on some level, probably. But they're doing it very intentionally to ramp up intensity. I mean, that's sort of the concept of a pre-workout blast of caffeine, so. Okay, one more, and then we'll chat with Chris some more. Can breakfast help with weight loss? This caught my attention. This is from labroots.com. Noran Amin is the name of the journalist. But this is something that I've wrestled with for the longest time. We've all heard breakfast is the most important meal of the day and that sort of stuff. And I was actually left wanting after I read this because I'm like, come on, guys. So there's a little video that goes with this. But basically it asks, does eating breakfast really help you lose fat? What they did was this is actually referencing a 2016 study. It says researchers randomly assigned individuals who have high body mass index to either eat a breakfast of 700 calories for 6 weeks or to avoid that breakfast for 6 weeks. And basically the rule was that they had to eat the breakfast, they defined it as before 11 a.m. So that's pretty loosely defined in my opinion. But and unfortunately it just says the results were mixed, leaving researchers to theorize. You know, there is the camp that says if you don't eat breakfast, you have less energy to move throughout the day, right? And that's why I always like my oatmeal and berries in the morning, you know, that kind of thing. Because basically you have enough energy to move around. You might get more intense workout or move around more. But then the other camp believes that sort of the opposite. If you eat breakfast, you're going to add calories, you know, that kind of thing. It's just very tough. If you eat breakfast in the morning, you have the energy to move around, and maybe you'll eat less in the evening, you know. Conversely, if you skip breakfast, maybe you get the munchies that evening and you destroy a bag of chips. Okay, but there's also some benefits to skipping breakfast. You know, it almost harkens to the intermittent fasting thing. Can you extend the time of a fast after sleeping all night? So it just leaves you saying that the researchers are theorizing back and forth on this, but there's nothing definitive. I'm guessing this is something genetic, maybe, you know, or maybe personality-based. Chris, I know you have a background in psych. Do you think this is a psychological thing, like some people are going to dig skipping breakfast and maybe they should have the right to? Or what's your opinion on breakfast?
I'm a big breakfast fan.
Mm-hmm.
I've written about 7 or 8 different things now on studies I've read, and that I really dug into that basically said eat breakfast, just like Mom said. And it's everything. There's so many things that involve that it involves. It's your hunger regulating hormones. Sometimes it is personality and lifestyle based things. But if you look at some of the studies on people who have lost weight, a significant amount of weight, and kept it off, they almost always eat breakfast. And those who gain it back are almost always breakfast skippers. And I read something yesterday that was really fascinating that sort of split the difference between the intermittent fasting, which I think some intermittent fasting can go too far. Sometimes I call it like anorexia light.
Okay, yeah.
Because people get a little crazy with just about everything, you know, and I've done it too. I used to love experimenting with all these things. But the thing I read yesterday was fascinating because it took like a 90-90 approach, a 90-minute approach. Delay your breakfast by 90 minutes, but stop eating 90 minutes before bed. And normally, like one of the things I do when I'm wanting to trim off a couple of pounds is I stop eating after dinner. I always have like a healthy snack at night watching TV, but it's really healthy. It's like protein and berries and nuts. But if I cut that off, if I cut my eating off about 3 hours before bed, in a few weeks I've easily trimmed off whatever I wanted to trim off. But this new study was interesting because it did show that people who delayed breakfast by just 90 minutes, not the usual like wake up and then don't eat for 4 more hours, as is common with many IF protocols. This was just 90 minutes, and then 90 minutes again at the end of the night. And it showed that I didn't dig too deep into this, but basically the people who did that lost more weight. But then it came right back. It didn't dig into hormones. It didn't dig into any of the physiological things that this can help with or hurt. It just basically said, if you have an eating window, you're probably going to consume fewer calories. So it kind of goes back to, well, because you're eating fewer calories.
Right.
Because you just have a window. But for me, it's eat breakfast, and you're less likely to overeat at night. And if you want to do an intermittent fast, I say cut it off at night, not in the morning. Fuel yourself up in the morning. And this is kind of a theory of mine, but I think if you wake up, if you're one of those people and you wake up and you're like, But Chris, I just don't want breakfast. I'm not really intermittent fasting. I just wake up and the thought of eating is gross. I don't want to eat. I'm fine going until 11 o'clock or even noon. I say that your appetite regulating mechanisms and your hormones and all this are probably jacked up. I think it's probably because you're really overeating at night, and I just don't think that's the best way to go about it from everything that I've read. So eat breakfast, cut it off at night if you want to try some light intermittent fasting.
Right on. Mike, when we were in Spain, there was a lot of talks about chronobiology and that kind of stuff. And you remember they were talking about if you exercise in the morning, you're turning on certain genes, internal clock type genes. A lot of them are in your liver, but they're really throughout your body. I got to think nutrition is similar to Chris's point about, there are hormones, there are different physiology things that come with eating breakfast. What are your thoughts on some of the eating and chronobiology? Maybe genetics are even part of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it also probably depends on what you're habitually doing. And I think there was a couple of studies that tried to look at this, and I can't remember the outcomes, to be honest, but if you habitually eat breakfast and you skip it, or if you don't, you add one in, because I think your chronobiology may sort of try to re-regulate to what you're used to doing. The human studies on meal spacing and timing from a chronobiology standpoint, I'm not really sure how important they are. I mean, I think they do have a role, and if you're a rat or a mouse, it's a massive role. But another conference we were at, Frank Turek's lab did one of the biggest studies on the exact same amount of calories, the exact same amount of food, and just giving them at different times in humans. And if I remember right, they didn't show a massive difference with that. But again, most free-living humans don't keep everything else the same and just change timing. They're usually changing how much they eat, what they eat, and timing. So it makes it kind of more of a bugger. On a practical sense, I do, if people are not making progress on what they're doing, then I usually try the kind of what Chris was saying, almost the opposite. So if they're routinely skipping breakfast and they don't eat till noon, then I'll probably try to push more calories a little bit earlier in the day and see if that works. Sometimes vice versa. If they eat breakfast all the time, I may have them try just one day a week, skipping breakfast or pushing it out to do a little bit longer fast and see how that goes. My thought being that, whatever they were doing before, for God knows whatever reason, wasn't working. So maybe let's try something a little bit different. And anecdotally, a lot of times that seems to help too. So
yeah. Maybe we'll get Mike Ormsby back on, ask him about some of the...
Yeah, I just talked to him the other day.
Perfect.
Yeah, so he's got some fascinating stuff about protein timing at night, and the really, really short version was it didn't really seem to mess things up the next day, and in general, you could have almost quote-unquote freer calories and protein at night, and didn't seem to be an effect. But we'll try to get him on, because he's got some super fascinating research in that area.
Yeah. To Chris's point, I'll do something similar. Like, I normally will do a bedtime snack kind of thing. Like, I get low-fat string cheese, and I'll eat 3 or 4 sticks of that, or something lower carb, like the berries that Chris is doing. I'll do that kind of stuff. And then when I'm trying to lean down, in fact, this semester, I'm actually doing something that I knew I had to do last time I competed to lose weight, because I was getting older and I had to get a little more aggressive. But it's sort of that intermittent fasting light, actually, like Chris was saying, which was on Thursdays, when I get up, I'll have some egg whites before I leave. But then I drink some low-dose whey protein, basically, and that's all I do during the day. And then, I don't eat my usual bedtime snack kind of thing. And am I hungry throughout the day? Yeah. I mean, I think on some level you got to get at least partly used to not panicking when you're hungry,
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're going to swig back 15 grams of whey with a little bit of leucine or something like that every 90 or 120 minutes, it makes it tolerable, So, that's probably the more rational idea, is being somewhat more moderate. So, okay. Just real quick, I just wanted to announce to everybody, I know a lot of the listeners said they were interested in the coffee project, the coffee taste testing, and all that's going on. There's just a slight delay. I'm actually reaching back and forth with some food science researchers. I want to use a flavor tasting wheel. It's part of the fun part of this project, by the way. you learn how to be a coffee taster by participating in this project. And to do that, I didn't want to just make up my own scales. I wanted to use one from the Specialty Coffee Association of America. There's a couple of food science profs in Kansas, actually, and in Texas A&M. And I'm going to ask them if I can't use this wheel that they developed. So it essentially talks you through, is it a dark roast? Is it a light roast? Is it more roasty? And if it's more roasty, in what way? Is it more nutty or like toast? You get the idea. So it talks you through the whole thing. And on the back end, what I'll be doing in the lab is then analyzing the brewed samples for different compounds, right? Different phytochemicals. And I'm going to see if these taste profiles relate to certain things. Like, does the caffeine make it taste more acidic? Does the chlorogenic acid make it taste more toasty? So that's the kind of stuff I'm doing on my end. But again, I need feedback from people, and that's why I've been reaching out. So if you did sign up for that study / just taste test project, stay tuned. I'm just going back and forth with some of these lawyers a little bit. And before we hit record, I'm holding in my hand right now the provisional patent for this, of the specific way to brew coffee to help with cognition and whatnot, and potentially muscle mass too. So anyway, it's exciting for me behind the scenes, so thank you for indulging me, listeners. I haven't forgotten, and we are very much underway. It's just I got a lot of stuff going on. So, all right, having said that, we're going to go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Chris essentially about the different kinds of media that are put out these days, maybe compared to back in the magazine-only era, and even navigating through some of the BS. So we'll be right back.
Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book. But that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
All right, everyone, we're back. It's Mike, it's Phil, it's Lonnie, and it's Chris Shugart. Chris, as you heard at the beginning of the episode, longtime writer and editor in the fitness world at T-Nation and Biotest and all the associated businesses. We're going to ask Chris a little bit about what he knows and even some of the newer things that he's got going on. In fact, let's start with that, Chris. So I know that T Nation has done quite a bit with video and things like that in the future, but you and your wife are thinking about like an audio format podcast. Is that right? And if so, why?
It's really interesting. I think you and I, Lonnie, were kind of the front runners in this. So T Nation started in 1998. And I got on with T Nation in 1999. And you can still find our old original articles from 1998 online. And what's fascinating is sometimes we'll rerun them on Facebook or something, and people will say, this would have been better if it would have had some videos of those exercises. And we say, in 1998, you could not have downloaded those videos
right.
with your internet dial-up connection.
Totally.
So, yeah, I feel like I feel really old when I tell my daughter how I didn't have the internet until 96,
Right.
Till I was 30 or whatever. But yeah, so starting a podcast for tnation.com, we did this a long time ago. And I would call them audio articles and I did several with you, I believe, and it was called the Double Tap series, and where I would call someone up, and in one take, I had a Radio Shack recorder that I hooked in my computer.
Nice.
And in one take, we would ask a couple of questions, and I would send that off as an MP3, and they put it on this little player at tnation.com.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't call it a podcast because there were no pods yet.
Yes,
like
right.
Pod wasn't around yet. That word hadn't came into the vernacular yet.
Right.
And you did the same thing, And so as T Nation evolves, as we go along, this is our 20-year anniversary.
Wow.
Of course, like everybody else, we've had to jump into Facebook and Twitter and Flipboard and Pinterest and name it, we're on it, Instagram. And I started thinking, well, what do I do in a lot of my spare time? What do I do when I'm taking care of the lawn or things like that? Well, I listened to a podcast. I thought, well, why aren't we jumping back into that, since, I should be really good at it by now. I should have kept going 15 years ago with this. And it's another avenue of reaching out, because these days, if you're a content provider, you're like what we used to call an online magazine, like tnation.com, or just your own website and your own blog. It's almost, not quite, but it's almost not about your website anymore. It's about the associated social media involved with that website.
Mm-hmm.
As a chief content officer, sometimes I wait to see if these new forms of social media really take off, and are they valuable to us? Can they drive traffic back to the site? Can they get our authors more readers, things like that? So we kind of wait a while. So Instagram looked like it was going to work out, and it was going to be very popular. And of course, it's huge now. So we started doing Instagram. I think we're at 218,000 now. And there are a lot of people who know T Nation as that Instagram account.
Oh, yeah.
Articles we publish there, the videos we publish on there. And it's really strange because several years ago, someone had started a T Nation Facebook page, someone who used to work for us, and they didn't really do anything with it. So I went to the big boss, Tim Patterson, the CEO and creator of tnation.com and Biotest supplements and everything. And I said, we've got to jump on this. We need a Twitter account that we use every day. We need to reactivate this Facebook account. And, his first response was like, but I want people to come to our website. I don't want them reading our articles on Facebook. We want the traffic to our website. We're one of the top fitness websites in the world, And I had to explain, that's how you get people to your website. You give them the ability to share and to like and to comment and to get your engagement rates up, which makes your page popular, which means they put it out there to more people. That's the way it used to work, at least. Facebook is now pay to play. But and so, social media especially is so important. And starting an official T Nation podcast with my wife, Danny, we think that's going to be just another layer to the whole thing that will eventually do what the big goal is when you're in the business, which is drive people to your website, into your store to buy your products.
Yeah, years ago, I remember a conversation I had with Tim Patterson, and he was so video oriented. He's like, no, audio, that we don't have to do that anymore. We got the bandwidth to do video. Video's cool, and I'm paraphrasing here, right? But he was positive on the video stuff. Now, you guys you're not going to step away from the video at all. You're just adding the audio on top. Is that right?
I think you have to do everything these days, because it's sort of like when blogging first began. There were a couple of popular bloggers like in our industry, and then everybody got a blog, and that's when you realize that, wow, people need editors. So my job is secure. But so these days everybody has the YouTube page, everybody has a podcast just about, and you have to do everything and just try to do it better than everybody else. So yeah, the audio podcast, we're still working on it. We're still getting some things. We have our first interview in the can with Christian Thibodeau, the strength coach. And we're just kind of learning how to put it all together and get it out there. But you have to do everything: video, audio, Instagram. And I'm reluctant to do. I'm not a fan of a lot of that stuff myself. I probably wouldn't have a Facebook page if I didn't have to have a Facebook page of my own to help with T Nation's Facebook page. But you just have to do that these days. You really do. And on every level, it's whether you're a writer, whether you're a researcher, it helps to get yourself out there. So many people who are nerds, excuse me, guys, all you PhDs out there, that's how you get invited to speak at conferences. And when you get invited to speak at conferences, maybe they saw you because you have an Instagram where you do little updates every day, or you have a YouTube page and you speak at conferences, and that's where it draws people to your ebook or anything you may be promoting on the side, or just to your work in general, because you think you're right. You want more people to hear your stuff.
Yeah. Your comment about the web page itself not being the only focus, and how people might know about T Nation just because of Instagram. Like, to them, that's what you are, or something like that.
Right.
I mean,
that's scary.
It is scary. In 2009, right, Phil, you and I, when we started Iron Radio, we just embraced the audio format because you can do it in such a way, like in your car on the way to the gym, while you're mowing the lawn, a lot of like what you're saying. And to me, it's old school, but I've always liked the audio thing because you can do other things and expose yourself to a community. In fact, a lot of the data suggests that the communities behind podcasts are more loyal and more interested, like in coming back every week than in some other formats. So I thought, hey, this sounds like a good idea to me. But what struck me over the years was that, yes, indeed, the website, like ironradio.org, it's not that updated. We've had some listeners say, it looks a little old school and this and that. Yeah, it does. It's really a portal to the audio, right? And so the website is really quite secondary. And I don't spend a ton of time on it because we are being disseminated through, Stitcher and iTunes and a little bit on YouTube, although for us it's really just sort of a backup. And a lot of these things, if I had the time to market properly, I would do what you said, Chris, which is focus on all these channels because they all interact. And they allow people to interact with you a little bit, But, yeah, the website thing, websites are going to become less and less the point of the Internet, I think. There's going to be the Internet of Things. There's all these devices and things that we have. And, yeah, and what a huge journey it's been since the late 90s. We were doing what we called internet radio. The podcasting, like you said, wasn't even a word. I hear these guys, they call themselves the Podfather, and they've been doing something since like 2012, and I'm like, oh, son.
Children.
Yeah, sit down. But yeah, I totally understand. Let me ask this. How do people navigate? There's so much crap. You talked about how we don't have editors as gatekeepers, and we've talked about this over the years. I even think with you years ago, but in general, because of self-publishing and this and that, do you have any tips? And I know this is kind of hard just on the fly, but any tips for people who they're interested? Because podcasts have exploded just in the last 5 years, I think. There's like even more of a resurgence of it. How do people navigate that? Do you have any tips for people? The video, the audio, the content providers. What are your suggestions?
as far as wanting to do it, or just wanting to be a consumer of it?
Right. No, good question. Just to consume it. They want to find good shit online. Right.
Right. Years ago, T-Nation was very focused on the authors and the coaches and the experts and the professors, and it became sort of a cult of personality in a way, because all you had to say is, here's a new article by so-and-so. And it was very focused on that person. Anyone would read it because, oh, that's by Charles Poliquin back in the day. I like all of his work. I'm going to read his work. These days, it's much more about the content itself. What is the article about? What is the video about? Do I want that information? Do I need 5 tips for deadlifting? Is the title enticing to me that I want to click on it and read it or watch it or consume it in some way, listen to it? And I think it was kind of better in the old days in a way, because you find people you trust. Like, I have my go-to people. Anytime a training concept comes around, anything dealing with lifting weights, I form my opinion, but I don't solidify that opinion until I talk to someone like Christian Thibodeau, because he will think around that subject 8 different ways and hit you with things you never thought about before, and kind of blow your mind. That's why I wanted to interview him first in our podcast. He blows my mind every time I talk to him. And with nutrition, there's the same thing. There are a handful of people. I want to know what Dr. Lowry thinks about this. I want to know what Mike D. Nelson thinks about this, because I need them to help me form my opinion, because I know they're going to think about things that I'm not thinking about yet, or bring up something that I just don't know about, because I'm not that smart. I'm just an editor type. But after 20 years of it, you kind of become a half expert in everything. And so my advice would be, to consume all you want, but then, bookmark in a way, follow, save those people who just can kind of give you everything you need to know about a subject, and not from a googly-eyed perspective. Because right now, the biggest problem I see with like social media and diets and nutrition, for example, is that people get very googly-eyed very quickly. They become, I call them diet cults. In other words, so here's someone, you say it's veganism, it's intermittent fasting, it's name it. Name whatever the eating trend is, paleo, whatever. And they do it for 2 or 3 weeks. Then they decide they're experts in it. and then they put out an Instagram page, a YouTube page, a Twitter page that's like Paleo Mike, and they put the word, or vegan, whatever they've tried for 2 weeks, they add that to their name. It becomes their identity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I do not want to listen to someone, I don't want to listen to the cult members' advice on, say, intermittent fasting. I don't want to talk to the googly-eyed person who's been doing it a month or 2. I want to talk to the person who has a background, who's tried lots of different things, and maybe has tried intermittent fasting for a considerable amount of time. I want that guy's opinion.
Yeah, I think that's wise.
They're going to give you the pros and the cons. And like, for example, I almost did paleo for a full year. I still used workout nutrition supplements around the peri-workout period. But I did paleo for almost a year. And I think I have a good opinion on it, because I did it for a long time. I did it, then I didn't do it. That's you want to talk to me about that if you're thinking about trying it, not the person who's been doing it 3 weeks and has got like the fanboy googly eyes.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That buy-in. The issue here is that I want to get a T-shirt that says "Science doesn't care what you want." Right? Because what people do is they get such buy-in, they start a belief system, and then they stop concluding. And you see my difference, right? You believe with your heart, but you conclude with your head. And you need someone who's neutral enough. Like, Mike, when you and I, if we want to put something in a peer-reviewed journal, you better make sure that everything you say is evidence-based and it's not belief-based, or you're going to get shot down immediately, right? So by exposing yourself in your case, Chris, it's to the different, strength coaches, nutritionists, authors. For Mike and I, we stumble in, like, as nerds, and, I embrace that. We go to conferences. Mike goes to conferences like no man I've ever known. But then you're exposed to such a wide variety. It really reinforces. You have to. A smart person will alter his or her conclusions based on new evidence, right? And those googly-eyed people won't. They'll defend the original point. Sagan used to talk about that. Like, it's very hard to untrain someone or let them know that it's something that they believe in is wrong, because you don't want to feel bamboozled, right? No one wants to admit that they were wrong or bamboozled, but that's not the rule of science. Is you change your conclusions and with new evidence. And if something comes along all of a sudden, for example, that told me that protein is going to really, really damage my kidneys, man, that goes again. I'm going to be skeptical. But if it's overwhelming across many studies and it's replicated and everything else, I might have to rethink and reconclude, right? And I would be willing to do that. Whereas there's a lot of people, like you said, if they're part of a cult of personality, forget it. You're not going to, and why would you listen to them? You're right, because all they're going to do is cherry pick evidence instead of trying to come up with what's real, right? Science is about real.
Echo chamber as well. So they're in many times they're not even hearing the other side of the argument or the possible downsides to something, because that doesn't make it into that chamber. If I say, hey, there was a study done on intermittent fasting and it's showing like belly fat accumulation after a while because it's possibly doing something to your insulin sensitivity, you don't bring that up in the Facebook group that is all about intermittent fasting, where they're saying they cured cancer and they're seeing auras and they ride unicorns now.
Right.
They're not gonna. That's never going to go into their discussion at all. When if you're like you said, if you're neutral about it, because you have to think about it. Why am I doing this diet or this training protocol or whatever? Well, I'm doing it for selfish reasons. I want to be stronger. I want to look better. I want to be healthier. I want to live longer. So why do I give a shit personally what that method is, unless I am like the diet cult type person? Mm-hmm. And you see this a lot in veganism, and I understand if they're coming from, I don't want to harm animals, and those movies about veganism and animal processing gross me out. I totally understand that. But, at one point you have to step back and go, listen, you have major nutritional deficiencies that are actually causing the depression that you're now getting drugged for, and that has major side effects. Maybe, just maybe, humans weren't meant to eat like you're eating. And be selfish about it. Do you want to live longer, feel great, and look better? Then give up the googly-eyed part a little bit and get selfish and, have some chicken.
I actually know someone who's a vegetarian who has recently embraced chicken, and she's like, wow. Like, not just taste, but, almost across the board. But Mike, what are your thoughts on some of what Chris is saying as far as navigating, the oceans of, because we've got audio, video, text, all this kind of stuff. I know that you've got a popular newsletter and you work online almost constantly. Do you try to disabuse your listeners or your readers of this googly-eyed cult personality kind of thing and keep them neutral and revising? Or, how do you help educate people and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's such a fine line. And, I learned this from you guys and Chris too, that I try to present what I think is correct at the time. And then based on anecdotal data or experience, and then, obviously, hopefully on research. So even in a newsletter, I have, if there's something that is from a study, I'll actually quote a study. I had one that went out that I had like 9 references in a freaking newsletter, for crying out loud. It took me 3 hours to write that one, which most of them aren't that long or that in depth. But at the end of it, trying to make sure, and I think T Nation does a good job of this, what is actually practical. So here's the science, here's what it says, here's what we think the conclusion is. And then what is sort of I think I stole this line from you, Chris, what is the kind of the payoff at the end? Okay, so having more protein before bed is a good idea. Different things like that. So even if someone wasn't entirely on board with the science and the reference, they're still kind of taking that person's word, but it's an application at the end. And I think having both of those is super important because you want something to show that it's based on actual research. I don't have any problems if people say, based on my experience, I've seen X, Y, and Z. Yeah, that's great. That's, can be super useful because there's not a randomized controlled trial on everything. But I think stating what evidence you have and where it came from, and then what is kind of the payoff for the person reading the article. Because to me, there's nothing worse, and I love research, but you go through 10 pages of reading this heavy research, and the summary at the end is just non-existent. You're like, oh, okay, what do I do?
Right. No, right.
If someone is good at reading research, it's useful. If you're not, you're like, I'm pissed because I spent 20 minutes now and I'm more confused.
Yeah.
We have a section at the end of our articles, and TC Luoma started this actually when we have this series of articles we call tips. And they're basically very short articles, and many of them are just looking at the latest studies, and where we break them down in really common, fun language. And TC started at the very end. He said, how to use this information. And I thought, oh my gosh, that needs to be at the end of every one of these. How to use this information.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I either picked this up from you, Chris, much like Mike, or from TC, but maybe probably a combination, which is tell a story and then offer some pay dirt at the end. And to me, it's even if it's just try this for a week or a month, or a couple of months, or give this a shot in the gym. Consider this, consider that, because sometimes it's hard, like with this breakfast stuff that we talked about earlier. That's hard to tease apart. And there may be nutrigenetic things at work and that kind of thing. And all science is not immediately practically applicable. It's the difference between science, which inches forward. Science is very reductionist. It's going to answer one little hypothesis, and people they want you to say, is that good? Well, I don't have a piece of equipment in my lab that measures good, kind of thing. So, but yet at the same time, when it comes to podcasting, it is fun to then talk about it and speculate it. We have some people who've reached out to us over the years and said, oh, you guys, you used to be purely evidence-based, and now you're opinion-based, like MSNBC or Fox. I'm like, okay, stop. Don't drag politics into this if that's what you mean. That's not – if you don't at least talk about how this might apply in your opinion, and so long as you're saying, hey, this is my opinion, or here's some speculation, then I think that's what makes it listenable, right? Like, Mike, you said it best, I think, months ago. You said, if you and I just got on here and read scientific manuscripts, especially basic research, not applicable, right, research, not applied, but basic research, oh, my God, we'd have, like, one listener, and he'd probably be someone that you and I immediately know. Yeah, and he'd be pissed, right? Right. So
commentary is where the entertainment is. And with all this social media stuff, we are seeking to entertain or infotain people. So, I mean, that's why Fox News and CNN and everything, that's why so many of those are commentary and opinion-based programming these days and not just hard news, because those get the most ratings. Those are the most fun. And Lonnie, you and I have talked about this a little bit. You have to keep some things entertaining, even as a researcher, even as a scientist. When you get out into the real world, you take that information out, and you want to give that to the public. You have to make it entertaining or fun or energetic or simple in some way, or what's the point of doing it?
Absolutely. In fact, you know what, Chris? I might send you a link. In the classroom last week, there was a Science Friday. There's a podcast, right? And they were doing interviews a couple of years ago with scientists about how you have to tell a story. If you don't tell a story, if you leave yourself out of it, it becomes so dull so fast that people, they won't even, learn anything from it. So there's definitely that. I just want to ask you one last thing, and this is from the production side, from the content provider side, Chris. number of co-hosts, like you're going to do this with your wife Danny. What benefit does multiple co-hosts have as opposed to, some of the YouTube channels are literally someone drinking a cup of coffee and looking into a webcam.
Right.
The optimal number of co-hosts, diversity among the co-hosts, any thoughts you might have. And again, this might be for some of our listeners who are more expert, right, or experienced, and maybe they want to be a content provider themselves. Should they consider a co-host, and if so, how many and who?
Well, I'm pretty new to this podcasting game, so I may change my mind after a year or two of doing it. But right now, everything I've read about, everything we've experimented with, best practices, things like that. First of all, it's very, very difficult to do it solo. You have to be a pro. And I'm talking about someone who's probably trained in media and has been in the media for 15 or 20 years to pull off a solo podcast show.
Yeah.
Most of them are incredibly boring, incredibly cheap, and oh God, I just can't. I can't listen to them myself. I'm listening to them to be informed, but also entertained. So I think a co-host is really necessary. Right now, if I had to guess, I would say it's host, co-host, guest. And if you go too much beyond that, it may get confusing. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I think there were at least 7 people on it. And I just forgot who was who.
I hear what you're saying about the solo only thing. I mean, at the very most, or very least rather, you'd have to have like segments with bumpers. Like, here's the news, because that's evergreen content. People might say, "Oh my God, you've done Iron Radio for 10 freaking years. How do you keep it fresh at all?" Well, Mike and I, especially the way Mike travels, with conferences and workshops, and myself a bit of that too, or myself, finding something new in the lab. News is one way to do that, but you got to chop it up in segments, that kind of stuff. Months ago, we had Dr. Cordero on, and she's a media professor, and she was actually talking about, different things, telling a story, a narrative, all the kinds of stuff, sections, and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's fun to do that, and I think the diversity is important too. One of the things, and I know Phil had to go off to the gym, but so much of Phil's membership is now women that I think having a co-host, having your wife on, is actually going to be very clever, right? Because sometimes, not that you can't talk about both genders yourself, but it's very handy to have a female perspective on her personal experiences and that kind of stuff. And again, I don't know if T Nation remains mostly men, like back in the 90s, but we're seeing a big influx of women, like a lot of the best growth and performance peaks and that sort of thing at powerlifting meets, women getting involved into just weight training in general.
Yeah, isn't that fantastic?
Yeah.
And I think we've seen a big change since the late 90s in that. I think we have to give CrossFit credit. CrossFit pulled women into the gyms where bodybuilding and powerlifting just had a trickle of women here and there interested in it. There's always that group, that people were really into lifting weights long before CrossFit. But CrossFit opened that door. They showed them beautiful bodies of women doing things athletic. There was nothing skanky about it.
Mm-hmm.
How some of the bikini contest posing things turns a lot of women off. We have to give CrossFit credit for that. And Danny's the first female editor of TNation.com. And it's really funny because sometimes we'll get some haters on social media and they'll say, just a bunch of guys doing this. I'm like, well, actually, that article was written by a woman and edited by our female female editor. But okay, I guess the word testosterone is still a little scary to some people.
Right. No, I hear you. A little diversity. To me, it's the whole concept. You said something earlier that I think is wise, like behind the scenes, is you do follow leads, like what's generating the attention. And you're not just doing that for yourself, you're doing that to meet the interests of the readership or the listenership, And if there's a lot of women coming on board, it's lean startup practices to follow the interest, at least on some level. So you're not wasting your time or talking about something people don't care about. So
right. It's fascinating because we kind of took a risk there several years ago, putting out articles just for women. We have a for women section now. And we thought, we see the numbers. We know we're mainly a male dominated site within this specific age group, et cetera. but I think it was one of Danny's articles actually. 10 mistakes women make with diets. It went over 1 million reads,
Whoa.
1 million views. I think it's closer to 2 now. I'll have to check. It exploded, and not only was it just like women, serious women, because here's what we hear from our female readers. Our female readers say, "I am so beyond Shape magazine." You know, they're so beyond things like that. They want hardcore information. They want the science. They don't want to be baby. They don't want to be talked down to. They don't want to be the pinkification. I don't know if you've ever heard that, where you just take any program or any diet or any supplement, and you make it pink and you market it towards women.
Oh,
They're sick of that shit. You know,
Right.
And so we're getting more and more female readers, and I think with the articles for females, our male readers are then passing those along, because social media and all that's all about shareability as well. So the diversity gets the women to read it and the men to pass it to the women, and I think we have many more female readers than we used to.
Yeah, everybody learns from it too. On Iron Radio, I can tell you, based on like the emails that we get, and we're not huge, right? But we get between a couple and several emails a week, like listener emails, and some of the most clever, most science-hungry, thoughtful kinds of questions are in fact from the women, who are now listening, and a lot of that is because of Phil's gym, and because he's just got girls killing it on the platform. But just and in many ways, they're just a good group of listeners to have, and it's a growing segment and all that kind of thing. Not that we don't like the meatheads, but Iron Radio, much like I think T-Nation is, we're really trying to. We're out there for the sort of warrior nerd kind of person, whether it's a guy or a girl, people who they're eager, they know that there's a connection between knowledge and their own physique or their own performance, and they're eager to improve mentally and physically, and it's not just the meathead who is going to roll their eyes, oh, science doesn't know what they're talking about, or I don't care about that shit, I just want to drink beer and bench 500 pounds and I don't want to know why, kind of thing like that. Not that there's, I don't know how many are out there, but you get the point. The pendulum is going to swing back and forth a little bit between egghead and meathead, and that's the kind of thing that we try to address. And I always personally appreciate the more thoughtful kinds of comments, and oftentimes it is in fact women doing that. Not that to say we don't have a lot of clever guys on the show, but anyway,
you know what I really enjoy seeing is on our social media, on Instagram comments, Facebook comments, or whatever. I enjoy seeing a guy get offended about something, like really hyper politically correct type of guy, and he gets really offended. Well, that article should not have said fact, because that is hurtful to people's feelings. I love it. A female comments back and says, "Stop being a little bitch." I love it. Women are the new hardcore meatheads in many ways.
No, you're right. You almost you got to be careful, because I say man up. Sometimes I correct myself and say or woman up. As it pertains, because when you're tougher cookies, some of them are women. Then how can you, I get it. All right, well that's about it. I know Phil had to be off to the gym, and Mike, you're out of here too. So
headed out here.
Good stuff. I appreciate you coming on, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, everyone. That's going to be it for this week, and we'll see you next time.
See you.
Hey, listeners, have you seen the store at ironradio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.